The Celestial Alliance chapter are one of the lesser known successor chapters of the Imperial Fists, but one which has a solid fanbase in the community. They are a chapter that has suffered a similar fate to the Lamenters, in that they are known for their apparent bad luck and negative twists of fate in their history. An essential difference between the Lamenters chapter and the Celestial Alliance chapter is that the Lamenters' bad luck was said to come from their cursed founding origins. We've already debunked this theory in another video, but the Celestial Alliance, they have no gene seed based bad luck. Their misfortune essentially came from questioning the authority of an Inquisitor. Ever since then, their fate has been filled with tragedy and mishap. But, like true sons of Dorn, they persevered and continued to fight in defense of the Imperium. In today's video, we are going to talk about the Celestial Alliance chapter, one of the most interesting and tragic of the Imperial Fist successor chapters. The Celestial Alliance chapter are thought to have been created sometime during the 38th millennium as a product of the Sentinel founding. After the conflicts of the millennium prior to this, nearly 60 Space Marine chapters had been lost to the Imperium, and so the Sentinel founding was initiated by the High Lords of Terra to replace some of the Space Marine strength that had been lost. The Celestial Alliance chapter was one of the chapters created during this time. There were several places where the presence of the Imperium was not as strong as some others. These were prime locations for Xenos and heretics to hold sway, and thus they were ideal places for Space Marine chapters to be created and stationed during the Sentinel founding. The chapters made during the Sentinel founding were intended to establish perpetual crusades against the enemies of humanity. This is different from being a Crusader chapter like the Black Templars. Perpetual Crusade chapters focused on fighting one enemy primarily. This, combined with the fact that these chapters were stationed in places where the Imperium lost or never had dominance, meant that these chapters were intended to hold Imperial territory in areas dominated by the enemy. A final point to be made about the chapters of the Sentinel founding is that they were created using the most stable gene seed available, and this is important because of the nearly 60 chapters created in the previous era. Many of them were flawed heavily or corrupted. The Celestial Alliance chapter were created from the population of the world Elysium 9, located in the Alera's Vale sector of the Ultima Segmentum. Elysium 9 was a world covered in jungles and savannas and was abundant in animal species. The dark-skinned people of the world were excellent hunters, and it was for this reason that the population was chosen as prospects for a Space Marine chapter. The Celestial Alliance would be Imperial Fist successors and sons of Rogal Dorn. The color scheme of the Celestial Alliance would be gold armor primarily, with light blue pauldrons and light blue helmets, though squad sergeants wore black helmets. Their chapter heraldry would be a roaring white lion profile, but depending on the rank, such as that of sergeant, the lion heraldry as well as the tactical insignia could be gold in color. The chapter is also known for incorporating lion symbology on their armor as well as white star patterns on the blue of their capes and pauldrons. The star patterns that would be portrayed on their armor represented the systems of Alera's Vale, which they were responsible for protecting. They adhered to the standards outlined in the Codex Astartes in regards to chapter organization and only deviated in the naming of specializations. For example, they called their captains war leaders and their sergeants pride leaders. They referred to their chaplains as death speakers and their apothecaries as life binders. Last but not least, they called their librarians spirit walkers. All of these names originated from the tribal culture of Elysium 9. The chapter's war cry is "For the Golden Sun," referring to their Primarch Rogal Dorn, and being that they are Imperial Fists, it's basically the shorter, more effective version of the Imperial Fists war cry. The culture of Elysium 9 also influenced how the Celestial Alliance interacted with each other. Though there was a hierarchy in the chapter, in communication with each other, the Alliance seemingly ignored rank. All members of the chapter could insert their opinions and insight, and it was considered with equal measure regardless of rank or status. The Celestial Alliance also had a collective way of telling stories, where each listener contributed to it in a way that made it seem as though the chapter was of one consciousness. Some, like Grimaldus of the Black Templars, considered this unorthodox, but it strengthened the bonds between the Astartes of the chapter. So there was a lot of conflict happening in Alera's Veil, with Xenos and Chaos forces alike. Because of this, there were 3 chapters stationed in that sector of space: the Celestial Lions, the Emperor's Spears, and the Star Scorpions. These 3 chapters formed an alliance of defense called the Adeptus Falarii and established the presence of the Imperium. Of the 3, the Celestial Lions were the oldest chapter. Therefore, the chapter master of the Celestial Lions was also considered the war master of the Imperial forces in the sector. The Star Scorpions chapter would eventually be lost in the warp, which left only the Celestial Lions and the Emperor's Spears to defend the Veil. Being that the Celestial Lions were a Crusade chapter, the specific enemy that they were created to fight perpetually against appears to be the Orcs. They even used a common derogatory name for them, the Keen, which means the cattle or the beasts. This would also explain why certain events we will discuss later happened the way that they did. The Celestial Lions' history is known for the amount of tragedy it has faced, but I think it's important to realize that before these events happened, the Celestial Lions were a competent and successful chapter of Space Marines who protected Alera's Veil for over 4,000 years. They knew what they were doing. They were a veteran status Space Marine chapter with an enviable amount of accomplishments on their banners. But this would all change when they came to the aid of an Inquisitor known as Apollyon. There was a world called Qatar, and it was a world mostly dedicated to the imperial cult. Its ruling body were priests and other religious figures. Somehow, this ruling body was corrupted into the worship of the Chaos Gods, and they ended up leading the world's civilian and military population astray down the same path. An inquisitor of the Ordo Xenos named Apollyon, who happened to be on Qatar at the time, sent out a message for aid in defeating this rebellion against the Imperium, and it was the Celestial Lions chapter who answered the call. What followed was the annihilation of Qatar's rebellion forces. In some sources, it's referred to as a cleansing because everyone who had raised arms in rebellion on Qatar was slaughtered by the Celestial Lions, leaving only the citizens who were caught in the middle of the conflict. Once the cleansing of Qatar was complete, the Celestial Lions returned to their ships. The time for war was finished. They intended to let the religious elements of the Imperium take over and lead the population back to the loyal path. But Inquisitor Apollyon looked at the population that was left and determined that the seeds of heresy had been planted deep and that the world's population was totally corrupted. So he condemned Qatar to exterminatus. His ship and the ships that were part of the Imperial blockade of the system opened fire on the planet from space, rendering the planet lifeless and destroyed. Upon seeing this, the Celestial Lions demanded that the destruction cease, but the Inquisitor refused, saying that the population was doomed regardless. The Celestial Lions not only felt that this was an injustice to those who were left on Qatar, but they also saw this as a disrespect to the chapter's effort in cleansing the world of the rebellion. But instead of confronting the Inquisitor any further, they passed the information about what happened on Qatar to as many nearby systems and sectors as possible. They even sent a delegation of Death Speakers and Pride leaders to the throne world itself so that the High Lords of Terra could hear about Apollyon's destruction. But this is where things would start to go bad for the chapter. The delegation that they had sent to Terra never made it to the Sol System. That ship was found 2 years later in Orc-held space, seemingly destroyed by Geller field malfunctions during warp travel. Despite their demand for someone in the upper echelons of the Imperial government to look into Apollyon's annihilation of Qatar, nothing really happened. But all this inquiry was bringing attention to the Celestial Lions chapter, and not the kind they wanted. No one questions the will of the Inquisition. Due to their sense of morality and justice, the Celestial Alliance didn't acknowledge that no one but the Emperor was above the Inquisition. The authority of Inquisitors supersedes even the dominance of the most powerful Astartes chapters. Even Custodes must work in cooperation with Inquisitors. In demanding that an Inquisitor's actions and decisions be scrutinized, they were questioning the Emperor's will directly, and that was not to be tolerated. It was during the Third War for Armageddon that the Celestial Alliance would suffer the consequences of their misjudgment. The Celestial Alliance had been called to Armageddon to help in destroying the Orc forces there. With their long history of fighting the Orcs, having the Celestial Alliance chapter on the planet meant having a valuable asset against the enemy. The majority of the chapter was deployed onto Armageddon, over 900 Celestial Alliance, but in only a couple of months after they initially deployed, half of that amount of Marines remained. Things seemed to keep going wrong for the chapter. Communication was often delayed, or critical information on enemy movements wouldn't reach the chapter in time. This would lead to the Celestial Alliance reinforcing Militarum battalions that had already been slaughtered or relocated elsewhere. They themselves would be told to relocate to areas said to be clear of the enemy, only to arrive at said location where the enemy actually dominated. Repeatedly, the chapter would be ambushed, outnumbered, and overwhelmed by the Orcs that they were fighting. The chapter's war leaders, their death speakers, and their lifebinders all fell victim to pinpoint accurate sniper fire during these ambushes. Pretty soon, all of the leadership of the chapter that was present on Armageddon would be killed. By this time, the remaining Celestial Alliance understood that they were being targeted and systematically eliminated, not by the Orcs, but by Inquisitor Apollyon and his minions, who were masking their actions with the Orc attacks. Orcs are not able to fire pinpoint accurate sniper fire, nor were Orcs able to jam communications or provide inaccurate information that would lead to ambush and ruin. This was the Inquisition, and this time, the Lions knew that there was nothing that they could do about it. The remaining Celestial Alliance decided to just embrace their fate and die as warriors, but the Black Templars chaplain Grimaldus, who was leading the Imperial forces on Armageddon, would not accept this. He wanted the chapter to survive and to rebuild. It was due to the intervention of the Black Templars that the remaining Celestial Alliance survived Armageddon at all. A new chapter master of the Celestial Alliance was chosen, a pride leader called Ikindu Baku, who was given relic armor from the Black Templars' arsenal to wear. Grimaldus helped Ikin and his remaining battle brothers return home to Ilera's Vale and their homeworld so that the Celestial Alliance could regain their numbers and strength. But even after Armageddon, the wrath of Apollyon followed them. While they were away, a chaos cult had arisen and had begun taking over Elysium 9. The remaining Celestial Alliance fought for their homeworld, but the cult was too powerful and the people of Elysium had to be evacuated from the planet in order to survive. With the majority of the chapter's apothecaries killed during the War for Armageddon, recruitment into the chapter was excruciatingly slow due to lack of expertise and to resource. A large percentage of the chapter's gene seed was rotting on Armageddon. Being that they were Imperial Fist successors, the Celestial Alliance would only need more gene seed from the gene banks of Mars. And being that Primaris organs had been created shortly before this, the chapter would benefit from receiving these resources. However, any gene seed resources that were sent to Ilera's Vale to reinforce the chapters there only made it to one of them, the Emperor's Spears. So, the Celestial Alliance were forced to be a extremely depleted firstborn chapter, even while those around them received the necessary organs to cross the Rubicon procedure. And then, Ikindu Baku, the new chapter master of the Celestial Alliance and the new war master of Ilera's Vale, was assassinated by an assassin sent by Apollyon. Believe it or not, that's where the Celestial Alliance lore is currently. No homeworld, barely any numbers, no Primaris organs, and no chapter master. I mean, usually in videos like this where I deep dive a Space Marine chapter, I'd like to say that there's some sort of redemption arc, but there literally isn't one right now for the Celestial Lions. So, my thoughts on the Celestial Lions. To be honest, they were one of my 3 favorite Imperial Fist successor chapters, along with the Executioners and the Black Templars. The true veterans of this channel would know that one of the first videos that I ever made on this YouTube channel was on the Celestial Lions. I loved their gold and blue color scheme, and I loved that there were some obvious cultural hints to Africa and African culture in their lore design. And just to be clear, the Celestial Lions are African inspired. Though their lore predates the writings of Aaron Dembski Bowden, ADB is the only author who has brought them into significance through his writings for Hell's Reach, Blood and Fire, and Spears of the Emperor. In his writings, he has described all of the Celestial Lions as having dark skin of those who live in equatorial climates, which is also describing the people of Elysium 9. He has described their world as one of jungles and savannas and says that they are excellent hunters and proud peoples. He has made the name Ikindu Baku, and the chapter master's name is a mix of African names. Their way of recounting stories as a group is African by tradition, called griot. It's an adherence to oral traditions of storytelling. The lion, in connection with all of these themes, being an obvious and stereotypical symbol of African culture, and plus, Aaron Dembski Bowden co-authored a Death Watch comic in which one of the Marines is a Celestial Lion, and this is how he looks. So, they are an African-inspired chapter, literally one of the only canon chapters that is openly so. As someone who is a Black or African American fan of the 40k universe, it's great to see elements of African culture in 40k done so well, and amongst the Space Marines at that, especially since it's generally something that some people in the wargaming community are really uncomfortable with seeing in other chapters, like the Space Wolves and the Ultramarines. I've played many successor chapters of Imperial Fists on the tabletop, since Rogal Dorn is my favorite Primarch and the Imperial Fists are my favorite Legion. When I found out about the Celestial Lions, I was so excited. I stripped all of my Space Marine models, painted as Imperial Fists, and repainted them as Celestial Lions. I played quite a few games with them as well. They just felt like a chapter that I could relate to some degree. The part of the Celestial Lions that I did not like was the direction of their lore. I had read their story in the Hell's Reach series first, and because of that I had hope for the future of the chapter, because Grimaldus, who is a main character, helped them to get off of Armageddon and back to the Veil. I had so much hope, in fact, that I built a whole army of Celestial Lions. I was fully invested. Then Spears of the Emperor was released and the Celestial Lions were featured in the book. I read the book and it broke my heart. It was one of those Warhammer books that actually made me cry, and I talk about it more on one of my videos, the Saddest Moments in 40k video here on my channel. But what was happening was I really couldn't understand why the only obviously African inspired Space Marine chapter was getting such a raw deal in the lore. As what so often happens with African culture in sci-fi settings, if it's represented at all, then it's connected to suffering and enduring trials. And everyone suffers in the 40k universe. We 40k fans, we know this. But with the Celestial Lions, things just seemed to be getting worse and worse. Like, the Lamenters had bad luck, but at least they received Primaris organs. The Crimson Fists were nearly decimated, but at least they received Primaris reinforcements. There are currently less than 100 Celestial Lions left in the 40k universe, and they are slowly getting killed off. There are even quotes attributed to the Celestial Lions talking about having to face the hardest trials first so that they know they're not wasting their time. And to me, that quote doesn't even make sense, because The Celestial Lions were a regular Space Marine chapter that had been doing fine since they were created. The tragedy that fell on the Celestial Lions wasn't due to the enemy that they were made to fight. It was due to an Inquisitor who didn't want to be questioned. It just seemed like, even in the 40k universe, things relating to African themes inevitably related to disproportionate amounts of suffering, and it is a tiring trope. Now, I don't blame ADB for this. He's an amazing writer, and I cried while reading his book more because of his writing than because of the fate of the Celestial Lions. But I will say that it was after reading that book that I decided to stop playing the Celestial Lions. I decided to leave the Celestial Lions and their fate to what GW determined it to be, and I created my own lion-themed Imperial Fist successor chapter of Dark-Skinned Hunters. And that's how the Void Lions came into existence. The Void Lions are my fan chapter inspired by the Celestial Lions. They were my attempt at writing a better story for a chapter with all the same themes, a chapter that suffers like everybody else does in the 40k universe, but one that is protected by the Inquisition instead of targeted by them. A lot of the fan art that I've commissioned of my Void Lions gets confused with Celestial Lions, but I can understand why. Despite the tragedy that has befallen the chapter in the lore, the Celestial Lions have a solid fan base of players who are sticking by the chapter through thick and thin. It's honestly great to see, but I've since personally disattached from the chapter as I am fully invested in the Void Lions. I'm not sure what the future has in store for the Celestial Lions. I mean, reasonably speaking, they will likely get some Primaris organs and become a Primaris chapter at some point. But so long as Apollyon and his network of Inquisitors are still alive, the Celestial Lions will continue to be hunted. And the bad thing is, it's not just the chapter itself, it's the Elysium people as well. Their population was significantly decreased, and they had to be taken off their own homeworld in order to survive. Now, considering that before he was killed, Ikin Dubaku was talking to the Emperor Spear chapter about possibly relocating the population to Nematon, which is the Emperor Spear's homeworld, that's a possibility that could happen in the future. Or, to protect the Celestial Alliance Space Marines, they could also be reincorporated into the Imperial Fists, and that would be completely valid, especially since they are Imperial Fist successors. The goal of Apollyon is to get rid of the Celestial Alliance chapter overall, so maybe a bit of the Last Wall Protocol technicality could help them out in this situation. Or, worst case scenario, the Celestial Alliance are completely destroyed and a new chapter is created using their name and chapter colors, or even just their colors, as is the case with the Star Scorpions of Illyra's Veil, whose color scheme was taken by the Mentor's chapter. I honestly don't know. The future is uncertain, but what is certain is that the Celestial Alliance are true sons of Dorn and that they move forward no matter what the misfortune. While the future looks bleak for them, they fight on, and it's for that reason that they are one of my top 3 favorite Imperial Fist successors, and why so many people in the community like the Celestial Alliance. What are your thoughts on the Celestial Alliance? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more content, and please share this video with your hobby friends as it helps the channel grow, and I would appreciate it. Thank you all for watching. Without anything else to say, Inquisitor Vaughn out. Remember, the Emperor protects and the future is successor.